The rains were passing through Plainview again. My last investigation went bad and the city seemed to suddenly lose its demand for private eyes. I'd returned to my natural state, inaction. I still had some cash from my last case to keep me afloat, but no activity substantial enough to occupy myself with. In the meantime, I'd been polishing some old case files. I thought they'd be a good start, that maybe I could do a memoir someday. They weren't Alice James or anything, but I saw some potential. I was working on them and drinking when I got a call from Robert Jefferson. He took over as chief of Plainview Police Department a few months back, after the Frank Hills fuck-up that led to the prior chief's death and replacement. Official story is some Nazis did it, but my recollections would show a different side of the story. Come to the new Plainview Park city side. There's been a murder. One I want your consultation on. Be there quick, Heffley. It's bad. The crime scene I arrived at was anything but professional. The body was unprotected from the elements, almost ripped apart by the torrents of surface water that cascaded down onto it. I edged towards the corpse, nudging newly traumatized ambulance geeks and burnt-out coroners away from me. The poor girl looked to be a lady of the night, savaged by an uncouth customer. Macabre shit, bro. The dame hadn't been plugged, not even up close. It was all knife work. Something deeply personal, a crime of passion. Her body was leaking rivulets of blood in all directions. Her waist was torn in two, housing a thin line of exposed extras seeping from her sides. She hardly looked human anymore. It was a sadistically artistic display of hatred. More haunting was the message on the wall above her. Up there on the wall, scrawled in what I hoped was paint but knew was blood, the murderer had left a message. In a faded rusty red, the words, "I'm coming, Sue," were splayed across the brick. The rain slashed at the words on the wall, but their meaning was clear. The killer was going to strike at society again, at whoever this Susan was. I prayed it wasn't referring to the Susan I was thinking of. Susan Hills, widow to Frank Hills, and a key figure in his demise. The mall was, after all, was the one who bashed his brains out onto the sewer floor. That was months ago. The case was closed. I backed away from the wall. Some cigar smoke stenched and a series of authoritative grunts alerted me to the fact that Chief Robert Jefferson was coming my way. Chief Jefferson walked towards me, looking like he'd teleported over from another century. I hadn't seen him for about that long. He was as cheery as ever, optimistic as Oswald Spengler. Grisly stuff, Heffley. We work in a grisly business, Mr. Jefferson. Even so, I haven't seen anything of this sort in years. We moved away from the body and out of the rain. Why do you take me to this show and tell? I trust your department can crack this one, Bob. To tell you the truth, I'm not so sure. We've had some personnel reshuffling since I took office. It's good to have new blood, but my boys can be a little clueless sometimes. The message on the wall, for instance, what do you think it means? Rob stared at me, eyes cold and demanding. The Susan thing, Greg. What do you make of it? I backed off a little, unnerved by his sudden Sherlock Holmes impersonation. I felt like I was being tested. I think it's a message. A message? Rob advanced on me, twirling his smoke stick. Well, it's a crime of emotion. We can guess the killer hates women. Who better to threaten than the most prominent woman in the city, your predecessor's wife? A great man, I'm sure you'd agree. I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but we had our issues. Rob stroked his chin, signifying thought like they did in the pictures. If you don't want issues with me, young man, you'll help pick up my son Raleigh from the film studios. You two are working this case together. I'm hiring you, Heffley. Get to it. I spit out of the park, freaked out about Rob's interrogation about the things he was implying, whatever they were. He knew I didn't like Frank, that tyrannical crusader, who ran a department with a fascist bent to rival an Ezra Pound poetry slam. Still, I decided to play nice with the new chief. I'd do him a favor and pick up his boorish son. Rowley had broken into the TV business since I last saw him, working with some local movie makers to craft the lies that dreams are built on. There was some recent tension between the studio bosses and some unions, but that had blown over and the streets were safe again. The image of Rowley as a black-wielding strikebreaker amused me. Maybe he could be a tough guy. In my experience, all he had was the element of surprise. Heavens to Betsy, he was a TV cop now. Greg? I just about died laughing as I ascended to the stage, cameras still rolling, and hauled him off, in front of the pretty ladies and the talent scouts. I hoped it was humiliating. Daddy's waiting. Greg, get off! So maybe I was a little jealous. I drove into the station, Rowley in tow. It was nice to go through the front door this time. That's for you whacking me upside the head last time we met. We're even now. Rowley was silent. I noticed the other officers glaring at me as we entered the chief's office. Rob wasted no time questioning my conduct immediately. What's wrong with Rowley, Greg? Just some friendly sparring, sir. Rob seemed unfazed. You two play nicely now. Go off and roast some suspects. Meet up sometime. You two arrange it. Let's find this creep. I left for home straight away. Rowley would just slow me down. It was time to go on the hunt again. A serial killer posed many questions. What I wanted to focus on was finding a pattern. Let Rowley and his copper friends dig through the autopsies, boring themselves to death and getting nowhere. I was going to hit the streets and find the sickest, strangest stuff that was happening out there. I plotted, of course, through all the city dives, planning to finish on my golden goose, Chirag Gupta. He's always had a good scoop. Just as I was getting into the zone, there was a loud knock at my door. I grumbled, grabbed the flashlight, and looked to see who it was. It was Susan Hills. Where's my fucking money? Come for more unpaid favors, you old hag? Greg, I need your help again. Please. What is in it for me this time? A kind word? Could you stop thinking about yourself for a second? There's a murderer after me. I took a step back and lit up another cigarette. Over the course of our shouting match, I had been lured into a cold outside. A serial killer paints my name on a wall mere blocks away from my home, and you expect me to be ignorant of that? I'm sorry all your money you expected was spent on Frank's funeral, but I need your protection now, just as you gave it to my daughter months back. For all the good it did for me, go away. Leave town if you're so scared. I retreated back into the house and slammed the door in her face. Faulkner was right. The past is never dead. It's not even past. I worked through all the northern bars. I must have spent a few hundred on bribes, and when that ran out, I simply waved my guns in the faces of saloon keepers. As Al Capone once said, you can get much farther with a kind word and a gun than you can with a kind word alone. Little Alberts, Darrens, Miss Patties, they all turned up snake eyes. The killer wasn't operating in my slice of suburbia. One of its few redeeming features, the boring burg. Maybe Raleigh was having more luck. Yeah, and maybe the Plainview Pirates would win a ball game. That would require Raleigh to have an IQ bigger than his shoe size. I set sail for Chirag's, hoping I would find the killer soon. At first, I thought Chirag had turned invisible, that he was hiding from me, playing some prank. The room was unclean as it always was. Chirag was no choir boy, but I knew what to expect. I was calm. That was before I wandered up to the bar. Greg, I always feared this would happen someday. Chirag was dead. Whoever did this, I knew they were gunning for me. I had to keep my wits sharp, get out of town for a bit. I knelt down and closed Chirag's eyes. There was a game well down the road. I had to phone the cops. I took a last look around the room, at all the flipped chairs and floor scratches, at the sideways stools that looked like the outstretched fingers of drowning men. I walked out, and almost got cut open with a knife. A foot flew across my chest. The killer. I hardly had time to react to the first slash before he sent another my way. He was fast, but he was no professional. Must have caught Chirag by surprise, the bastard. I wasn't a big guy, but neither was he, so I twisted the knife out of his hand and punched him in the neck. He let out an inhuman shriek and grabbed at me, pulling me down with arms like tentacles. I continued to thrash in his direction. His face was wet and pulpy, but his mask stubbornly stayed on. At this point in the fights, we had rolled into a street-side gutter. Even the worst dregs of Midnight City society knew to stay away. I bent over the killer and let him have it, for Chirag. I wasn't paying attention to the knife he still had. It slid deep into my chest. The fight was over, and I was having an out-of-body experience. Then again, I think some of my brain was outside of my body at that point. I was overtaken by a buffet of horrific thoughts. The very nightmares that swim through your subconscious on a dark and quiet night, when your mind is soaked in an old scotch and incubates in cigarette smoke. Is this what people mean when they talk about life flashing before their eyes? The same thing happened in the sewers with Frank. This was worse. It was hallucinatory. I tried to block out the images blitzing the borders of my imagination. So there I lay dying, feeling only the bitter cold and the razor-sharp edge of the knife that was snaking through my organs. I rested, ready to finally sleep the big sleep, when someone began to rudely approach. It was the last thing I could make out before my eyes shut, like the closing of a coffin door. I was hauled to a car. It was a bumpy ride, but I couldn't complain. The youthful tone of a familiar woman assaulted my ears. "You might not be looking out for us, but we're looking out for you." I angled myself upwards, beginning to recuperate from my injuries. I knew her when I saw her, even from behind. Holly Hills. "I was sent by Mom to follow you, and saw the killer doing the same. He got to Chirag before the two of us. He knows the streets well. I waited for him to go before saving you. That's the thanks you get for last time's business. If it helps you." I saw the glint of some badge in his back pocket. "Tell your mother I've decided to take you to it. The killer's coming after all of us. I know that now." Susan was still waiting by my house. I pushed past her and opened the door. The moment I entered, those two harpies began to shriek. They had been fermenting their hatred and frustration with me for months, citing my ingratitude for all the times they'd saved my life. Pretty soon, I was tired of hearing it. Ignoring their cries, I barricaded myself in the file room. "You should have done this for free." I got out a notepad, filled a flask with some stockpiled whiskey, and wrote down the information I got from my run-in with the killer. He had a badge. That meant he was a cop gone bad, or killed a policeman sometime before he did. Chirag. Both options weren't good. They meant that there were things that Rob wasn't telling me. I couldn't go straight to the cops then, at least not the higher-ups like Rob Jefferson. Raleigh seemed isolated enough from the old man for me to recruit him. Despite our difficulties, my street sources were tapped out. I mulled over where to go next. Then he hit me. I pulled out an old photograph from a desk drawer. Alex Cerruta was the head of the South Plainview Mafia. At his peak, he was a power broker who could go head-to-head with Frank Hills or the feds. He survived all of them. With Frank's death, he funneled dozens of dirty cops into Plainview's PD's hiring offices, eventually purging the Frank wing of the department. It was a bloody piece of work indeed. If piled correctly, I could get lots of information from him. I need to schedule a sit-down. I continued to skim through a case file and drink before I passed out. When I awoke from my stupor, I emerged from my room to fill Susan and Holly in on my plans. "I want to come," said Holly. I almost sighed out of reflex, but stopped myself. She could be useful, sure. You can watch my back. She stared at me wide-eyed, expecting a little more. I swallowed. "And thank you for saving me from the killer." Holly lay back again, satisfied, for now. Susan still looked suspicious. Okay, well, she always looked paranoid and miserable, but just a slight degree more this time. Alex Ceruta's a dangerous man, Greg. Just make sure you remember who you're dealing with. I have some more reinforcements waiting for me there. This isn't my first meeting with the man, ma'am. Stay in your lane. We met Rowley under the bridge to the city, by the water. As the full moon reached its apex, he put out a cigarette into the sea, then turned to face me. He'd freshened up a bit, but still stared at the two of us with contempt. "What's the move, Heffley?" I was thinking that we'd go down to Aruta's den, ask him things. "Why's the dame here?" "The dame?" Holly said. "The dame," Holly said, "is here to help on the case. That trouble you, movie star?" Rowley frowned. I chuckled. "No further questions." You're off camera, Slick," I said. "No need for the tough talk around Holly and I. Let's get to the gangland before the sun rises." Cars still clogged these streets, even this late at night. It was a street fighting night, a riot night. The Don's doorman had a rifle ready to go. He was friendly enough, though. "Here to see your boss, Plainview PD business." "Sure, it's all legal up here. We have nothing to hide. This isn't just a normal roast, just some questions about a murder. I trust you, even though you've got the chief's son in tow." I turned. Rowley was shuddering, and doing bad at hiding it. It seemed the inner city was spooking him. "This fearless crusader spearheading the whole thing. Blame him if something goes down," I said, smirking. "Let yourselves in. I gotta deal with some hoodlums down the road." Suspiciously cavalier, he eased us into the dark club. Once my eyes adjusted to the club's dark interior, I wished that they hadn't. It was a fucking mess. Pool cues cracked against each other's like swords when they weren't being bounced off the bar patrons' heads. Drink flowed freely and split with even more abandon, while the girls danced for leering bouncers, twisting for their lives. This wasn't a place like Chirag's. I was embarking on a fashion deal, but as the old cliche goes, better the devil you know. Even then, the sin and debauchery of this room was making me question that logic. Don Alex hit us with a beam of light as we walked into his office. "Hi, Seamus. Got any guards in here?" I asked. "Don't need any." Alex ignored them, but Holly and especially Rowley were spooked. I would have thought that Palooka liked being in the spotlight. "You hear about the killings this side of the bridge recently?" "A little. It's not my doing. Not that any murders have been." "Anything you can give us?" "Sure. Notice anything different?" "What's with the black suit tonight?" I squinted, making out a tear in the South Plainview mafioso's eyes. "Morning." I was right. He had something to share with us. Before I could comment on his show of weakness, Don Alex gestured to Holly and I, leaving his chair to speak to us away from Rowley. "I've tried not to interact with that cop for a reason, but there's something private I need to tell you two. My boys keeping tabs on the police have told me that the chief wants to pin those murders on you, so don't trust his kid over there, Jefferson Minor." I gasped. My cigarette fell from my mouth. Then I leaned in, interested in his theory but desperate to stop Rowley from listening. "It's why he had you to consult in the first place, to keep you on the case, so he could have his kid report on you. Watch yourself." Rowley started to approach us. Alex raised his voice in response. "I do have a body to show you. It comes to me now." Alex started to whisper again as Rowley backed off, satisfied. "Don't go stool pigeon on me if you find something on the body. We're both in the same anti-cop camp. Whatever camp you're in, I'm several tents away. Show me the corpse." "Very well. Do either of you have any questions about it for me?" "Who's the victim?" I asked as Holly slunked away. "Big Al Sandy. His brother runs a joint up north. I spoke to him recently. He didn't tell me about this. Lil Al doesn't know. Keep it that way for now." "What's Big Al doing?" What was Big Al doing? He was knifed by the killer a few days ago, as he inspected my street operations. That's all? He was with a girl. We scrapped the two off the sidewalks the next morning and disposed of them. I'll take you to the bins. And thanked you for taking care of Frank Hills, that turncoat for me. Rowley stepped in, blocking the path between us and the doors. He said, "How do I know you haven't tampered with it?" Alex adjusted his glasses and smirked. "You'll just have to trust me." The body did stink, but what struck me about the corpse was its weight. Rowley and I hauled it out of the drain, ready to inspect. The body got a little damp, maybe an intestine fell out, but it was intact. It was as scarred and disturbed as the girl in the parks. But most curiously of all, there was something wedged into Al's hand. Averting my eyes from Big Al's Glasgow smile, I stepped away from the body. Rowley plucked the piece of paper from his bloody hand and shoved it in my face. The poster's contents were alarming. Rowley began to theorize aloud. What's this supposed to mean? What's Frank got to do with this? Deep down, I knew, but I could not say. That sick creature idolized him. This meant Alex was right, that Holly's guts instincts were true. The killer had to have some connection to the cop. On the flip side of the poster, half covered in blood, the killer had left a message. The odd Spanish symbol could be found atop certain letters. But once I decoded the illegible handwriting, the killer's warnings commanded my attention. Frank Hills was a homegrown Plainview hero. He would have come for all of you. He would have purged the mafia if you and your German lackeys hadn't killed him. And now I'm going to finish his crusade, Plainview's child. I gave the note back to Rowley and tried not to get blood on me. Holly skipped over towards us and Rowley handed her the note. She started to shake, like a frail winter buffeted by the rain. "What's eating you?" I asked. "That someone would kill in Frank's name." Rowley was shook by the revelation too. He stepped out into the rain and carefully approached a game wall across the road. Even though the storm, I could see his force of the machine open with primal ferocity. "Operator, put me through the Chief Jefferson." The sound of operational static was distant but legible, as was Rowley's heavy breathing. "Dad, we found something on the body. One of Frank Hill's old election posters." Another barrage of static could be heard. I could make out snippets. Could be that framing "Watch out for find our killer." Rowley's face contorted with disgust. He slammed the phone back into its resting place. Rowley stomped back to us, growling, and not because of the rain. "What did Rob say?" "Nothing important. He told me to be more active with the case, to stop you two from hogging all the glory." I scoffed, watching Rowley's face strangely contort in annoyance. "Especially when you and the mole have been colluding with Don Alex." I laughed in his face. Holly, insulted, chimed in with jibe of her own. "At this point, I'd rather be the Don's mall than a whore of your corrupt department." "Unscrew this, I'm leaving," Rowley said. "Where to?" I asked. "You big screen bronze? A world you'll never be a part of." With Rowley repelled, Holly and I retired back to the house. As we sat down, poured drinks and lit cigarettes, the phone rang. Rob Jefferson's voice greeted us. "Good to see you've made progress. I'll start some internal affairs investigations. See if you have any pro-Frank zealots that need weeding out. God help me, I almost said start with yourself. In charge will be Officer Manuel, a new hire from the Southwest. He's a tough guy and smells uncompromised. You two can meet at the movie star formal I'm setting up." "What's this?" "Rowley didn't tell you? Tomorrow night, a big fundraiser for our local boys. We need cash for this crisis. Do come, meet people." Suddenly Rowley's acting gig seemed much more purposeful. "I'll think it over. Whatever your choice is, make it soon. We don't have much time." Night and the city, an iconic combination. Holly and I rested off the exhausting week and steeled ourselves for its incoming crescendo. We would descend into the vapid, hedonistic cult that was the Plainview Film List, birthplace of horrific appetites and spoilt stars. Someone needed to give them a good kick in the head to remind them it wasn't the 1920s anymore. But not anytime soon, thanks to their incest with the Plainview PD. Susan wished to come, but I rebuffed her. Having Holly with me already unnerved some of them. Stay here, I know you can take care of yourself. She gave her daughter a frigid kiss, and that was that. Into the belly of the beast. The glitz and glamour of the function overtook us both. Holly pointed off at a distant car. That car over there belongs to Joshi, the rock star. Oh, smash a headlight for me, dear. I put out a cigarette into a cake tray a waiter was waving around outside. It probably came off as a lot less cool than I imagined it looking. Yes, I know, I'm a spiteful bastard. It was straight out of Hieronymus Bosch, a garden of degenerate delights, watered with wine, sweat, and urine. I could not believe that this life was ever one of my temptations. The excess of the movie industry made the past week's Mafia dives look positively juvenile. The band screeched out hot jazz hits, its banshee wail a siren song, calling all wide-eyed Scarlets to the dance floor, with salivating producers in tow. Holly and I kept close, jostling through the crowd, making our way to Rob Jefferson on the dance floor. I muscled through the mob, Holly clinging to my hand like a child. The drink spill cleared away in favor of tapped shoe prints and lost jewelry. I thought about scooping some up, but that would be in bad taste. Not that everything else in the room wasn't. Gaudy clothes, those optical infernos sewn together into the leftover dregs of a bygone age, were all the rage. Golds, blacks, and silvers, and deep, muted red lips out at us, only to be shooed away. I began to see Rob Jefferson in the distance, across the ballroom floor. Holly and I advanced, but a big bouncer stopped us from getting close. Partners only. I stared at her and gulped. We would have to dance our way through. The band swapped swing for the 3-penny opera number. We danced. The change in soundtrack was a bad omen, though we did not know it as the crowd merged and we all swapped partners with grace and intentional energy. Even that old grouch Rob Jefferson clicked his fingers to the beat, trying to hide his excited finger pointing from the hall. I had finally secured a moment of reprieve from all the carnage of the case. Holly had loosened up as well, admirably. All was right, and then a scream. A new dance partner fell into my arms, then slumped over my entire body, staining my shirt with cold, fresh blood. Another girl croaked, and none in the mob could make out the culprit. I slid into a wall, blood-soaked body bearing down on me. Holly and the chief ran up to me, panicked. I laid the corpse down. We were both dripping. Great job doing security. Too distracted by your friend? This was Manuel's sector. I was trying to get to you. Don't start shifting the blame. At this point, you're a suspect. This rash of killings, you think I'm the one holding the knife? Why not, Seamus? You have to have been stalking Susan Hill's daughter for a reason. Because her mother's been at my house. Raleigh materialized from the screaming crowd, shaking. Manuel's gone. Quiet, boy. Greg has just admitted to sheltering Frank's old lady. Dad, I'm worried about where he is. Do you think the killer... Greg's treachery is our concern right now. Rob's sudden paranoid mood swing was the last straw for me. I had this rant simmering since the start of the damn investigation. I was sick of the Jefferson family. I didn't care who knew it. I had prepared every barb, tailored each to Rob's character, and got ready to fire at them, like stakes through a vampire's heart. A thunderstorm outside battered the roof. The ceiling shuddered and shook, starting to leak rain down into the dance hall. Bob Jefferson and I were too entangled in our argument to notice. "Stay out of my business, Jefferson. The chief is in the ground. His family's doings are none of your concern. You never were as good as the old psychological algebra as Frank and I were. So stop idolizing his memory and painting yourself as his hair to cover your own defective detective work." Rob grimaced as the lightning strike flashed across the room. "You shouldn't talk about Frank unless you want to confess a crime. You see, Greg, there always was something about the whole Frank Hill's crowd killer angle I could never quite come to terms with." "Dad, we don't have time for this. This is crucial, Rob. I've been doing my own investigations with Manuel providing help." "Who killed Frank Hills?" "It wasn't the Southern Mafia. They hadn't the balls. Though they did molest my department after. It wasn't the Germans. Frank loved them. First I suspected Susan Hills. Frank could be rough with her. When she showed up at your place, I smelled conspiracy. That barkeep of yours was involved too, but you killed him to cover your tracks. I came all the way from the city to track down Frank's killer, and if Officer Manuel is correct, I'm looking at him. You pulled that trigger, Greg. You put my friend in the ground. Who knows? We may find an iron cross in your wardrobe yet." Rob continued his rant. "So Manuel isn't perfect. He can be aggressive. He can act out. I can control that. I can't control the murder spree of a third party long gone from the force. I saw Frank's body in that sewer. It was too clean, too good to be true. You may or may not be innocent of the serial killings, but you're goddamn guilty of Frank Hill's murder." Thunder rolled in the distance, punctuating his accusations. "Unbelievable," I said. "Letting a literal serial killer savage the city with impunity while looking the other way and printing it on me." I lit smoke and extinguished the cigarette onto Rob's shirt, exhaling the smoke across his stern face. "Using shoestring evidence from some serial killer to put me in a frame? You're delusional, Rob, and you're welcome to come and get me." Holly and I hopped into the car and drove off. We stayed quiet for a bit, trying to make sense of Rob's conspiracies. "So he knows about Frank." Holly stared blankly ahead at the freeway. "He has no proof, Greg, just a hunch. Rob wants to frame us for the killings. We have to find Manuel." Holly nodded. I started to notice some cop sirens in the distance. The lights and raindrops across my windscreen combined to blind me. But I couldn't stop yet. Not while Manuel was loose and Susan was home alone. Let's just get back home. Home? Something truly horrifying was happening there. We just didn't know it yet. The night was as dark as freshly laid freeway asphalt. The rain rattled across my windshield, with a sound like machine gun discharge. A storm of damnation had spread up north from city to suburb, descending over my neighborhood, the air now thick with malevolence. I was to confront hellish evil on my home turf. It did not comfort me in the slightest. My cynical side was being proven right tonight. We were too late. My front door was ajar. Outside was the killer, Officer Manuel. He had a long knife in his hand and was eyeing Susan Hills like a python eyes an egg. A haunting expression of familiarity spread across Susan's face. Then came some fatalistic tears, almost impossible to make out in the rain and the night. Susan and Manuel stayed silent. There was a primal understanding between the two of them not shared with Holly and I. I slid my gun out of its holster and sluggishly aimed it at Manny. Holly rushed forward, blocking my shot, to get to her mother. Cursing, I followed her further into my desecrated front yard. Manny raised his knife, and perhaps in fear of a long painful death, Susan strode out of the door to meet him. We darted through the downpour. Holly screamed and Manny lunged forward. "No!" Susan's limp figure fell to the ground. I shot at the killer through the rain, choking down the sulfur smell of the gun smoke. Manny took one in the leg and started to hobble. Holly dived to the ground and held her mother in her arms. I chased down Manuel. The wind roared, distant sirens emerged, and Manny's knife clattered to the ground. He was going to make a run for it. Coward. Holly wailed and I took another shot. Manny slid behind the house, bleeding, and escaped. To the old house? Those were the last words of Susan Hills. She repeated them a few times, coming closer to a whisper with every repetition. Then her head fell back, and life left her body. I waited until I had driven a solid enough distance away from the cops to ask Holly what Susan was talking about. She had a house in the Northwest before she met Frank and had me. Greg, the police are going to be after us. I had to say something to cheer her up. I recalled a political rally I'd heard on the radio and stole a phrase from it. I welcomed their hatred. And so, with Rob Jefferson's police at our heels, and Officer Manuel lurking in the shadows, Holly and I went northwest. We wanted to be far from the city and its corrupt inhabitants. On the way out of town, seeing my house being raided in the rearview mirror, I had time to mull over all that had happened to me. I tried to carry out everything important for the case, and that meant abandoning my embellished memoirs to the Plainview PD, as well as all the trinkets I had hoarded over the years. All I had left was Holly's companionship. Armed with Susan's last clue, our mission now was to solve Manny's mysteries and bring him to justice, so Rob could not fit us in a frame, to clear our names or die trying.